So everyone, I just want to introduce to you Nina Agarwal, who's an organizer with Sunrise Movement and is going to talk a bit about their work before handing things off to Varshini. So Nina, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay? Great, awesome. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm super stoked to be here with you tonight and so grateful to you all for showing up to learn more about Sunrise and what we do. My name is Naina. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a high school senior from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I started organizing with Sunrise locally and nationally about 2 years ago, and actually learned to organize first from divestment organizers at the University of Michigan. So yeah, super thrilled to be here with you all tonight. And Varshini is an amazing friend and mentor of mine. So just really excited that you all are going to get the opportunity to talk to her too. But I'm going to give you a little bit of context about where Sunrise came from, what Sunrise's goals are, and what kind of work we do. And yeah, if you all have questions for me, you can feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to address them. So Sunrise, for folks who may not have ever heard of us before, is a movement of young people fighting climate change. The movement was founded in the aftermath of the 2016 election, which was obviously a period in our nation's history where prospects of climate action were looking pretty bleak, politically, but also in terms of the strength of the movement. So Sunrise founders sort of recognized that the growth of the climate movement as a whole was not proportional to the scale of the crisis that we were facing. And that the climate movement was in many ways failing to build the power that it needed to take on this massive problem of stopping climate change. So Sunrise founders came from all sectors of the climate movement, from pipeline fights, from campus divestment fights, and lots of other places, to think about what they could do to sort of up the ante and up the ambition of the climate movement. They knew that it was going to be important to combat this narrative of jobs versus environment, or like economic growth versus environmental protection. They also knew that it was time for the environmental movement to step up for marginalized communities, Black folks, Indigenous folks, working class folks, in ways that it never had before. And they knew that the narrative around climate change needed to shift away from these individual solutions like paper or plastic at the grocery store towards this idea of systemic change and changing the status quo and changing business as usual. So in collaboration with a lot of frontline groups and a lot of partners, they developed this idea of a Green New Deal, which really was about stopping climate change and creating millions of good jobs in the process. After they had sort of come up with this idea to transition our economy over the span of about 10 years from an extractive one to a regenerative one, they needed a plan to win. So they started to develop Sunrise's theory of change. And our theory of change really revolves around two core points. The first is people power, which just means like protest, nonviolent direct action, people in the streets, demanding a livable and sustainable and just future. And then also other core point is political power, which is about electing movement champions and people who are aligned with the movement's goals to local and national office. And so those are really the two key things that Sunrise strives for in all of the work that we do. And they work together really nicely. Sunrise kind of exploded all over the country in 2018 after staging a sit-in at the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, demanding that she and the Democratic establishment throw their support behind this idea of a Green New Deal, and more broadly, the idea of bold, intersectional climate solutions. I remember I was a sophomore in high school at the time, and I remember seeing these pictures of young people lining the halls of Speaker Pelosi's office with signs that said, like, Democrats, what is your plan? And I was so impacted by that as a sophomore and as a young person, because it really spoke to this fear that I had that, like, the people in charge of our country just didn't have a plan to address this existential crisis that defines our generation's future. Um, and yeah, that protest was joined by newly elected Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and generated a lot of national media buzz. And over the span of just a few weeks after that, Sunrise grew from this sort of scrappy organization with a few small hubs in cities like Boston to a national presence with hundreds of hubs all over the country who were devoted to taking this message of a Green New Deal into their community and fighting for this idea of a just transition. Fast forward to like 2019, I joined the movement later in my sophomore year, in large part because my dad's family is from northern India and my mom's family is from rural Appalachia. And these are both climate affected areas and areas that are affected by systemic poverty and decades of governmental disinvestment. And I was seeing natural disasters like flooding and wildfires hit these communities and seeing how hard it was for them to rebuild because of economic and racial injustice. And I just really felt attached to Sunrise's message that social justice was central to the climate justice fight. So I joined the movement and started throwing down for the 2019 climate strikes, which Sunrise played a role in nationally. And that was an incredible experience to see hundreds of thousands of young people taking to the streets all over the country and all over the world to demand climate justice from their leaders. And that sort of ties into this idea of people power. And then as the months progressed, Sunrise started working on gearing up for the 2020 elections and for the 2020 primaries. Sunrise makes endorsements of candidates. So we endorsed progressive candidates like Jamal Bowman in New York, Congressman Jamal Bowman now, Congresswoman Marie Newman in Ohio, or Illinois, I think it might be Illinois. Anyways, and also working towards this idea of a climate debate and just doing everything we could to push climate justice into the center of our national political discourse. That was largely successful. We talked about climate more than we ever have before over the course of the 2020 election cycle. And when it became clear that President Biden was going to become the Democratic nominee, Sunrise did everything we could to support and push the Biden campaign to be more progressive on climate issues. Varshini sat on the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force and really played a critical role in helping to shape President Biden's policy platform around issues of climate justice. Some of the key victories from that included a civilian climate corps to provide Americans with good, dignified jobs in building a better, greener future, and also a huge increase in the proposed investment in building that future again, and also a caveat that 40% of federal investment dollars are going to go to marginalized communities and frontline communities, which is huge. And both of those things are really in line with this vision of a Green New Deal. So that's a little bit about how we engaged with the 2020 elections, a little bit on the political power side of things. And we are so pumped that now we have a Democratic trifecta. Democrats hold control of the House, of the Senate by a narrow margin, and of the presidency. And we recognize this moment in history as a really, really pivotal one and a really critical one when it comes to passing Green New Deal legislation and laying the foundation for what we hope will be a decade of bold, unprecedented, and social justice oriented action on the climate crisis. So over the course of this spring, we are going to be launching a new campaign centered around green jobs. We already won the Civilian Climate Corps, like I said, just a week or two back. But we're really going to push for the creation of something like 10 million federal green jobs, and also towards this idea of a federal jobs guarantee, which was in the original Green New Deal resolution that went through Congress during its last cycle. And then beyond just green jobs, which is going to be our focus, we're also going to be working towards a green recovery. So some of our legislative priorities include those $2,000 stimulus checks, democracy reform, and making sure that we can strengthen our democracy for the decade that lies ahead, workers' rights and racial justice, of course, and also continuing to up the ante on federal investment in a sustainable future. That's a little bit on the political side. And then on the people power side, we're going to be really focused on building popular support for these ideas and for these priorities, and continuing to shape the public's idea of the future that we can build as we work to combat the climate crisis. And that's a little bit about us. Does anybody have questions about anything I just said, or reactions or anything?
Thanks so much. That was awesome. It was great to hear about all the work you've been doing and all the work that Sunrise has been doing for a couple of years now. I think we've all benefited for it, so much appreciation. I'll hand things off now to my co-host Ben, who will introduce Varshini Prakash, our speaker for the evening.
Awesome.
So hello, everyone. I'm speaking from my phone, but you can also pin me up top. I'm here on camera too, so if you want to see my beautiful face. I just want to introduce Varshini. She is the executive director and co-founder of Sunrise, a movement of young people working to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs through the process and push forward the Green New Deal. She's been a leading voice for young Americans, including when she helped lead mass demonstrations for the Green New Deal with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that went viral and put the climate crisis at the top of the political agenda for the 2020 elections, which we just heard about. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, MSNBC, the New Yorker, the BBC, the Washington Post, and more. In 2019, she was named Forbes 30 Under 30 list for Law and Policy and Time 100 Next, a new list of rising stars who shape politics, popular culture, and science, and more. Varshini currently lives in Boston, and we're so glad to have you on here today.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. How's everyone doing? In Sunrise, we're very vocal in the chat, so I very much welcome folks to drop in. I don't know how you're doing, what you're thinking about, where you're coming from. It would be great. I mean, if you have where you're going to school, or if you're not in school, whatever, that would be phenomenal as well. Because I'm sorry I had to miss the first half of this meeting for a pre-existing commitment, but would love to hear just where folks are coming from. Also seeing some familiar names, which is great. Okay, Stockton University, Stanford, awesome.
This is very reminiscent of Sunrise trainings right now.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but I just can't, if I can't vibe with folks and really feel your energy, even though we're in a digital space, it is so hard for me to actually share myself and share my story and all of that. So I'm just really, it's great to hear a little bit of who's in the virtual room. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for hosting this event. And I know I'm just going to share a bit, I think, of right at the top here of my, just my story, my journey into organizing work, my divestment time at my time at UMass, which I really just describe as my foray into organizing time, because that was probably the most significant thing that I learned in my undergraduate education. And then, yeah, I think we're going to do some questions and hopefully just have more of a dialogue. So yeah, thank you for being here. And thank you, Nina, for that awesome overview of Sunrise. Nina's a total badass, and I'm really grateful that you're a part of our movement. So thanks for that. Cool. Well, I think I just want to start way back at the beginning. And I apologize if you've heard this story before, but I wanted to start you off by just talking to you about my home. I'm from India, specifically Southern India, specifically Chennai, and Bangalore is where my mom and my dad are from. And it is a place that is extremely near and dear to my heart. Feels like the blood in my veins, even if I don't get to live or be there very often. And I think the one of the moments that, now that I think about it, like decades in the future, really initiated my, the reason why I'm in this movement was the tsunami that hit back in 2004 in the Indian Ocean. And I remember being a little kid, being like 10 years old or something, and just like reflecting on the fact that I had never seen that level of carnage in my entire life. Like just 100-foot waves that were crashing down, literally wiping away the face of the earth on these beaches. Like being glued to this TV screen and watching this little ticker on the bottom, like the bottom left side of CNN, just with the death toll, and seeing every hour that I would be looking at it, it would be like 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 and more. And going to bed those nights, just seeing these images of, like, in my brain of kids that had run up to collect seashells when the water had receded, and then only to see this like sea wall just emerging in front of them. And I remember feeling just like deeply just desperate to do something. You know that feeling when you see calamity happening and you're just like, what is in my power to do? Like, what is it that I can do to like alleviate the level of pain that I was feeling? And I didn't really have that much to do. So I had this like Red Cross donation box in my class, and we were gathering supplies. So I just like go try to find all the cans of beans and like dump them in the thing. And I remember gathering everything that I had at my disposal and then looking at the box and thinking, Jesus, this is like not even close to enough. Like I cannot save anybody through this. And the level of like the sinking feeling of powerlessness that I felt is something that I don't think has ever left me, and always like, yeah, has like compelled me to figure out how to discover my own agency in the midst of that crisis. And so this wasn't the only crisis that I saw emerging when we were younger. Like we're, the climate generation, seeing Hurricane Katrina and 3,000 people being killed who were primarily elderly, Black, poor, learning about pipelines and toxic waste sites in tribal lands, learning about like the pile of trash that was like twice the size of Texas that was just sitting in the Pacific Ocean, and being like, what the hell? Like, how does that happen? And, just feeling like something was fundamentally wrong with our world. And that, I think there's a lot of suffering that happens in the world that you cannot stop, but there's a lot that you can. And to me, part of why when I got into college and sort of tripped and fell into the divestment movement, part of it was feeling like I had just this existential responsibility, like this moral duty to do everything in my power and in our power to build a just and equitable society for as many people as we can. And making sort of a choice, like I think stepping into the campaign when I was at UMass Amherst was making the choice that powerlessness and feeling small were never going to hold me back again. And it just so turns out that I freaking love organizing. Like, it's amazing. It is like this incredibly powerful thing that I was introduced to in this class called Grassroots Community Organizing at UMass. And like got invited to be a part of a divestment campaign. And together we were able to get 4,000, 5,000 people on campus to sign a petition around around divestment. We did numerous marches and rallies. We had, negotiations and meetings with very powerful people in our school administration, some of which were sympathetic, and then some of which were like, the other spectrum being this guy who used to work for Trump saying to my face, after I told him basically the same story that I shared with you, that all he cares about is making money. And so I think I learned really early on, like we couldn't rely on those with power to make the changes that we needed, just out of the sheer goodness of their hearts, or because they'd have like a come to Jesus moment. It was going to be up to us. It was up to ordinary kids who were standing up to make it happen. And basically, like after running this campaign, it was my baby. My school definitely, my schooling suffered, but it was my like top priority when I was in undergrad. We led almost 1,000 young people in a week-long sit-in where over 34 young people were arrested, risking conducting basically civil disobedience, calling on the university to change their investment policies. And the last time that this had happened on my campus was actually for South African apartheid. And just 1 month later, the UMass system divested and became the first major public institution, educational institution to divest. And so I think it was this clear indicator that people power works, that organizing works, that if you have the tenacity and the refusal to accept defeat, and you have a vision of what you are fighting for and the skills to get you there, that we can win. And I think at that time, it was about 2015 or 2016, we won a lot. There were trillions of dollars of money that was being divested from the fossil fuel industry. There was this burgeoning grassroots movement around climate. You saw the stoppage of the Keystone XL and the Dakota Access pipelines, some of the first steps towards federal climate policy. But at the same time, and I was working at an organization called the Divestment Student Network, which no longer exists, but was where I was working to coach, dozens of campaigns, divestment campaigns across the country. We had this sinking feeling that our existing movements just weren't enough, that even though we had accomplished so much, we were still navigating this worsening crisis. The science was getting worse, the physical effects of the crisis were getting worse, and that divestment had been a phenomenal tactic, and at the same time because of its focus on primarily private institutions, we weren't able to compel the most powerful force in America, the federal government, to take the crisis as seriously as it merited. And that millions of young people who were just as freaked out as us didn't have a political vehicle to vocalize their fear and frustration. So I'm not gonna go into the whole 3 years that have happened, because Nana did a really good job of that overview, but we launched Sunrise in the spring of 2017 with a vision of making climate action that was rooted in economic and racial justice a priority at the highest levels of government in this country. We have existed at the nexus of building people power and political power, because we know we can't just exist railing on a system from the outside, and just focusing on lobbying and advocacy efforts will also not be enough. We need disruptive power as well. And so I'll open up to questions in just a second, but there's a couple of takeaways that I just have from my divestment work that I was thinking of when y'all asked me to do this. One was the biggest thing that I saw holding campaigns back when I was organizing on them was, and this is still true, it has nothing to do with divestment, it's just about campaigning, but a lot of people didn't understand that your campaign begins at no. When your administrator is like, oh yeah, I've taken your nice proposal and you know what we think about it? No, that is when the campaign begins. That is when the fight starts. That is when you actually turn up the heat and you start organizing your butt off to make it happen. And having a deep tenacity, again, as I said, an unwillingness to accept defeat. If that sit-in hadn't succeeded, we would have been figuring out how we could be blockading downtown Boston to make it happen. Whatever, that may have not been the best tactic, but whatever it would have been, we would have been thinking about what comes next and how do we actually elevate this campaign to make it possible, because literal human civilization is on the line. That is how important the work that we are doing is, and how important it is that we win. The second thing is the team is the thing, investing deeply in a trusting, accountable culture, and doing strong leadership development, and really building the core team that it can weather the storm and organize through thick and thin. That is, and investing in a truly diverse and authentically diverse team, not as window dressing, but through real relationships, is absolutely critical. And when we were able to create a real nexus of leadership that include new leaders, the campaign just elevated to a whole new echelon. And the third thing is, I saw a lot of campaigns do great, they had all the points down. And like going to a university, we're all like, yes, we can compel people through the through the elegance of our words and a really well formulated argument. And I got to tell you, like, I watch people sit through like literal dozens of meetings with administrators. At some point, it's like the words don't matter. And at some point, you actually have to invest in key organizing skills, like how to run effective meetings, storytelling, one-to-one conversations, and direct action, and a plan to win that goes far beyond just trying to move through the regular channels that many of us who attend, elite institutions or colleges and universities are privy to, or think is like the path to victory. So that's just some of the stuff that was top of mind. Also, totally down to hear any questions or stuff that y'all are struggling with, and if there's anything I didn't touch on. Yeah, I'm down to talk about it.
Yeah, so can everyone, if you have a question, can you drop it in the chat? And we also have a few that were written out by some of the organizers when we started. So I just want to start with, even though we're probably all here for divestment, why divest?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that divestment did really effectively was building greater consensus around the problem at hand. We would all walk around our campus saying the Bill McKibben motto of like, if it's wrong to wreck the planet, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. I don't know if anybody's like still around from those days, but it still rings true. Like, there is an entire industry that is profiting, that has lied, that has stolen, that has hidden the science on the reality of the climate crisis for 50 years and sank just billions of dollars into a massive cover-up and denial and disinformation campaign. And so one of the clearest ways that we can actually build public support for the end of, an extractive economic system is to really make clear what the problem is. So that's my sense of how I would talk about why divestment is important. But ultimately, divestment is a tactic, and what's important is that we are both articulating and building consensus in the broader public around what the problem is, and also building consensus around what the true solutions to this crisis are at the scale, at the investment level, at the justice focus that we need them to be, and engaging in a multitude of tactics behind that.
Yeah, summarized it perfectly. So we have one from Michelle here. How do you think university divestment wins can be leveraged into creating policy at the governmental level?
Yeah.
So I guess pushing your university, I guess, as a collective to make things happen in that state where the university is.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I saw some folks talking about pension fund fights, and I think like aligning, I think some of the work that I saw back in the day that I really was excited about was like student campaigns joining with statewide like pension divestment efforts, or with big economic institutions and things like that. Sorry, financial institutions. And I think, ultimately it's important to also be real that unless, like, I think the other ways through state formations, like UMass Amherst was very closely tied to obviously the state of Massachusetts. And so it was easier to sort of put pressure on, like if we had pursued this tactic further, I could imagine like putting pressure on local state officials in Massachusetts to support divestment overall, actually like figuring out who the hell is in charge of appointing the people who sit on the boards and all of that kind of stuff, and putting pressure on those guys. So creating like a surround sound effect that not only affects the institution itself of whatever university, but also affects the just like milieu that people are existing in. And it's like, I think there's an interesting thing. One, I do actually I'll be totally like upfront with y'all. Like the reason why I work for Sunrise now is in part because there was a big gap around being able to connect the need for state power and like federal action with the divestment effort. And so like oftentimes those things actually are different theories of change in different parts of the movement ecology. And so but I think like if you're working at a private institution, chances are if you're working at a Stanford or you're going to school at a Stanford or a Princeton or whatever, there's a lot of people who graduated from those places who are in high places now, or people in the tech industry who are currently contributing to a hell of a lot of misinformation out in the world on the issue of climate, or I'm just like spitballing here, but those are things that you could also be thinking about, is like power mapping. Who are the people you know and what are they doing, and how can you actually use that to leverage for greater government action?
Yeah, so speaking about leveraging, I guess, how has Sunrise, I guess, leveraged or organized differently with the pandemic, and how, I'll kind of combine it with one of the questions, like how, especially in a virtual format, do you really choose your team? That's exactly what you were talking about before. How do you build that team in a virtual format? So yeah.
Yeah, it sucks, guys. I'll be honest. It's hard it's even hard. It's really hard at Sunrise too. JP, who's on this call, he could attest, we just spent like 3 hours trying to figure this out. But it's like, it's hard. I mean, I think the key is to take the things that build culture offline and see how to translate them online. I mean, just as an experiment, like, what are the things that you have done in your campaigns or on your, or even like, what's a time that you were on a team that felt really like there was some glue, there was some culture, there was some real relationality? I mean, do people have ideas? Like, what were some of the things that you actually did? Sorry, let's just see if maybe people will drop it in the chat.
Yeah. If you have an answer to this, you guys,
what do you think?
Your mics, come on.
Or drop it in the chat, whatever. Sometimes speaking.
I'm gonna start calling on people.
Oh, love it. Virtual rant nights, game nights, so good. Having fun, big piece of this. We used to have like a no talent show whenever we'd get together, where people would just do like dumb stuff and laugh together, and that would be really fun. Actually, that's like possible virtually. What are other stuff, Nana, JP, like things that we've done to really build culture online? Storytelling, we still tell a lot of stories, and just like connect with each other on a more human level. Nana, do you have one?
Just gonna say, like, always a good thing to like sound share on your computer and share like fun like pop songs and throwbacks that everyone knows and like get people dancing. That's worked a lot on Sunrise calls to like break the ice and just help people bond.
Totally. Yeah. And so, I mean, I feel like it's a very long conversation. Oh yeah, last night we watched the Britney Spears documentary and had a discussion about it, which actually is very related to many of the things that we all care about. And so, yeah, I think like bringing the heart into, like, I think a lot of like institutions can focus so heavily on the head that we lose the heart and we lose the hands. And so things that we can do together that bring all of those three things into balance and in our work have always really helped. And I think like seeing that as just as important as the tactical or the strategic or the intellectual or all of the other stuff. Like, if your team doesn't feel coherent, it's going to be really hard to do work, especially when you're getting pressure from the administration or you're stuck or the world is really difficult and things like that. Let me see what other questions.
Yeah, we have another question from our list here. I think everyone can relate to this who does environmental work. How do we combat like burnout as an organizer, or like how do we combat like that climate doom feeling?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think they're related and different. They're very related though. When I think about my journey with burnout, I think a lot of it has been deeply working with and experiencing and processing the things that evolution has equipped us with when we perceive being under threat, like fight, flight, freeze, whatever, appease, whatever the last one is. You know, the sense of just like, we are constantly gonna die. Like something is constantly at my back. Something is constantly, I'm being chased. I'm under threat. Because we are, like, that is what is going on with the climate crisis. We are consistently feeling like the world is crumbling around us. And as young people, I mean, just, you know, the level of debt we're saddled with, you know, consistently being put into shittier and shittier jobs with a worse social safety net. All of these things like gun violence, you know, racism, like so much insecurity. And I think for me, a lot of it has been trying to figure out how to both balance making space for the very real grief and the very real fear that I experience doing this work on a daily basis, and actually expanding for that rather than contracting against that. I think oftentimes when you just resist the fear, it stands up right in front of you and makes it impossible to do anything else, and just contributes to like an immense amount of stress. And so I think just like making space to actually feel what is going on for you, making space to like grieve about the world and process that emotionally is critically important. And your anger and the fear that usually underlies anger. And then having tools at your disposal around resilience. So I have a really I have a very committed meditation practice. I have a very committed vacation practice. And living in America, we like think that 2 weeks a year is like enough vacation. And then we're wondering why we're just like crawling to the finish line at the end of it and just like trying to survive. I'm trying to, you know, having real boundaries around when I work and just like infusing balance and resilience into many of the things that I do. And so I think that is a long journey. I've been on it for many years, but I'm really seeing the dividends like years down the road of things that I was struggling with so big time just a little while ago.
Yeah, and we'll take one more question from the chat because it's 7 o'clock now. I don't want to push you out any longer. So I think this one is a really good one from, oh, I got lost in all these chat. How do we stop making bold climate policy partisan issue? And I think that also relates to divestment. How do we make it like more palatable to like large organizations?
Yeah. Well, something I'll say is in many ways, actually, it's very clear that the policies and the program that is behind things like a Green New Deal is extremely popular. There is overwhelming popularity around things like clean air and clean water. There's overwhelming support for things like investment in renewable energy. There's overwhelming support for good, high-paying jobs. There's overwhelming support for the vast majority of the policies that we believe in. And I think the thing that the climate movement has consistently struggled with is how to actually bring that, is to fight for that vision and bring people into that vision, rather than just taking something that is actually really popular and diluting it as though trying to get to some kind of like non-existent center. And so it's a very big question. I think we have a lot of questions in front of us about like, what is the nature of the Republican Party and how is it going to change at like an elite level? But I think with everyday people, people's ideologies, even though things are getting more polarized, are a lot less fixed than we think they are. And people are actually share many of the same values, even, you know, as our politics gets more, I don't know what the word for it is, like just, I guess polarized is the word for it. And so to me, I think we're trying to figure out like, how do we actually organize in a way that does not isn't just like a gathering of the people who all agree and not just like a preaching of the choir, but is actually organizing for persuasion and organizing to change hearts and minds and organizing to bring people into the fold. Probably not the people who are like, you know, fire hosing Fox News 24 hours a day, but I think people who might be, you know, who might actually be on our team, but maybe have been confused by many of the really toxic messages that are out there. I'm also, I don't know, I'm just seeing a lot of questions in here about like, you know, our trustees like care about, you know, I'm seeing this question about like divestment is fine as long as the endowment doesn't suffer. And I'm seeing another question like that too about the pension, I think the retirement system, I don't know. There's like, I'm like, New York State is divesting. Like, I don't know what other evidence you need than the fact that like many people have their, you know, pension funds tied up in the New York State system, and they have chosen to make that decision. And so I'm just like, there is no institution in America that should be concerned. In fact, it is a dereliction of duty to continue to be invested in fossil fuels at this point. And so like, to me, this is the prime example of when campaigns get stuck in like, oh, well, our trustees just don't want to do it. How do we convince them that this is the right intellectual choice? It's actually not. They're playing on a terrain of power, and we're trying to have an intellectual argument. And what it is like, actually our campaigns need to get serious about building and wielding power in an organized way. And that is what is actually going to get us to victory. And that's the part of the campaign that can actually get really exciting and really fun, and also probably involve some level of genuine confrontation.
Yeah, I think what we take from like the last two questions there is that like we're all like human, so we need this planet here, and it doesn't even matter that if divestment was not financially good, we need to divest either way because we can't continue using fossil fuels. But it is. You can just tell your universities that, hey, this is better for you financially wise. It's more sustainable. So I'm seeing a lot of people have to hit it because our time is up here. I just wanted to say thank you for coming out today. It's like an honor to have you here with us today, a climate leader, of course. And I just wanted to thank everyone for coming here and contributing to this awesome discussion. Look at all the love in the comments there in the chat.
Thank you.
So it was great having you, and let's go divest, everyone.